welcome back to the Fairy Frequency channel. If you're here on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get all of the channel notifications. If you've missed any of the previous chapters of this very magical book, you can find them on our playlist tab in our original playlist titled The 21 Lessons of Merlyn. This book is a study in Druid magic and lore. It is written by the very talented Douglas Monroe, who has compiled much of this information from a great many sources and doctrines. So, we are now on Chapter 8. Chapter 8, The Garden. So I think we're just going to go ahead and get started with that. Let me see if I can move this down just a little bit more. There we go. All right. So let's just go ahead and dive right in, my dears. There's a little bit of magic in all of us. Never forget that. It starts with your imagination. Here, we have a wonderful illustration of Merlyn's cave at Newis Mountain in Wales. Very cool illustration, photograph, maybe. Looks like a neat cave. So, Chapter 8, The Garden. Not on my father, nor of my mother, was my blood, was my body. I was spellbound by Gwydion, prime enchanter of the Britons, when he formed me of 9 blossoms, 9 buds of various kind. From primrose of the mountain, broom, meadow, sweet, and cockle, together intertwined. From the bean it is it in its shade bearing, a white spectral army of earth, of earthly kind. From blossoms of the nettle, oak, thorn, and bashful chestnut, 9 powers of 9 flowers, 9 powers in me combined. 9 buds of plant and tree, long and white are my fingers, as the 9th wave of the sea. This is Mabinogion Haynes Blodaweed. Blodaweed. Sorry if I mispronounced that. The bright new green of springtime was everywhere around us as we made our way northward toward Wales. On this particular morning, we had ridden continually for more than 5 hours before halting outside the large city of Abergavenny to rest. And since the noontime sun was fast becoming hot, we chose to pause for a while within the shade of a dense stand of oak just off the main road. I can tell by the feel of the ground here that this place was once a fairy grove, Merlyn stated, while taking out his flute to play. Watch and listen carefully to everything around us as I begin, not with your physical faculties, mind you, but with your otherworld senses instead. I listened as intently as I could, whilst the sound of the music rose and fell with great mystery between the earth mounds and the trees, but could not detect much of anything else with certainty. Finally, Merlyn laid down the flute in his lap and looked over. Now, Arthur, you've listened with your ears and watched with your eyes, but have you seen and heard little? The time has come for you to view the world through your spirit body, your other self. Close your eyes tightly and listen again to my music. Envision yourself to be one with the sound, and then When the voice of your inner guide calls forth that the time is right, open your eyes and look again. With this, Merlyn played a different tune, softer and slower, but with no less power. Up and down fell the notes until I felt as if I were in a boat upon the open seas. And then, sure enough, after a time, there welled up inside me an overpowering desire to look beyond. I opened my eyes, but was not prepared for what I saw. There, milling about us in a circle, was the oddest assembly of beings one could imagine. Short, plump, human-like figures in green dress and pointed shoes. Tiny, fairy-like beings who hovered on transparent wings over every flower. Little fairy-like beings, little creatures no bigger than a dog, but with the torso of a man and the body of a horse. Convinced that I was surely dreaming, I reached out my hands to touch them. All at once they faded in unison from sight. Merlyn ceased playing and shook his head in annoyance. "Why did you do that?" he asked abruptly. "Do what?" I answered. "I must have been daydreaming, that's all." But when Merlyn again shook his head from side to side, I suddenly realized that the beings must not have been dreams after all. "Just because you believe something to be a vision," he scolded, "you instantly assume that it is unreal. Well, I'm here to tell you that this is not so. When one can see, who can see the wind after all, or the waves that quake the earth from below, or thunder, or the heat within a dark oven that parches the bread? Cannot these things topple empires and melt mountains, even though they cannot be seen? Yes, the entities which you saw about us were every bit as real as we ourselves, although I often wonder if they don't consider us to be somewhat less than genuine." Here Merlyn took a long pause. "And how they love the music. There be nothing that I, Twyleth Teg, love more than the sound of a pipe. Dreams. Consider them not as unreal, but simply as different." For a while it seemed as if Merlyn was deep in thought, running his fingers through the grass and counting off handfuls of clover. "In any event," he said after a fashion, "we are headed for a place which just might convince you of the truth in my words. Come, let us make haste, for the time we have been allotted together is too rapidly drawing to a close, and we dare not arouse the ire of either the good abbot or his Christian God, dare we?" And after all that serious talk, I looked Merlyn square in the face to discover if he was in earnest or not, and he was smiling. Not long after we returned to the road, another mountain rose up before us, very different in contour than the gentle hills that we left behind. Jagged and severe, it was altogether wild-looking. Wild, but beautiful. I thought to myself, both beautiful in their own way, both neither good nor bad, just different, as a Druid might say. "We are almost home," Merlyn called back, and I wondered at the emphasis that he placed on the word home. We came to a small stone cottage owned by an aged couple, where we left our horse and proceeded uphill on foot. The path we followed was both scenic and dangerous, coming so close at points to 100 feet of precipice that my breath came and went in short gasps. But Merlyn was always there, quickly on guard whenever my step would even slightly falter. It was twilight when our way ended abruptly at the face of a waterfall. which fell before us from a height too great to estimate in the dim light. Tired and hungry, I groaned aloud and sat down heavily on a moss-covered rock. "Don't be discouraged," Merlyn said, "for like so many other things in this world of magic, what might at first appear to be an obstacle is oftentimes a gateway into some new and splendid realm." With that, he disappeared behind the sparkling sheet of water as I looked after him, wide-eyed. Upon closer inspection, I found that the path did not really end at all, but neatly wound itself behind the falls in an abrupt turn, not easily visible in the shadows, and with this discovery I first set foot within Merlin's wondrous cave dwelling on Nue's mountain. Peering inside, I was at once heralded by an excited flapping of wings. As the great raven Solomon greeted me once again, how often I had wondered where this crafty bird resided when not with his master, and now that was clear, for he looked just as at home there as did Merlin himself. By the time Solomon and I had renewed our acquaintance, the druid had begun to stuff dry kindling into a massive fireplace, which occupied the better part of the entire wall. In no time at all, he had a cheerful fire blazing away. We sat down to a hearty meal of fresh eggs, courtesy of the cottage folk, bread from Abergavenny, fruit from Camelot Hill, and a deep crock of brown honey from the larder. It seemed that such simple food never tasted as good. Other than its homey atmosphere, this cave was truly a place of mystery. All around, on every shelf and every nook, were vast assortments of gadgets and oddities irresistible to my eyes. While I was exploring aimlessly about, Merlin hung a pot of water over the fire and lit his pipe. After several minutes of skillfully blowing smoke rings through smoke rings, he got up and he walked over to a long shelf crowded with bottles and jars of all types and sizes. He motioned over to me to join him. "Do you have a preference as to which of these herbs to take as tea before bed?" he asked. "These have all been grown and dried from my own garden, and for every purpose of mind and body." "You have a garden?" I asked in surprise. "Why, of course," he answered with a chuckle. "Every druid must have a garden, for without one we could not soothe or heal in the manner for which we are famous. See here for yourself. Name a condition that ails you, and we shall endeavor if a remedy within these crocks is to be found." The game was afoot. I studied the bottles carefully, as each was well labeled with the plant to be found therein. Although I could not read very well at that time, I was later to memorize them all fully in order, as a required exercise. What here follows is a rhyme I made after the manner of a bard, by which I accomplished this: golden ruth, amber, butter, and red rose, pepin, elfwort bark, dracos, crocus, dwar, plants of summer, fire and spark, silver bow and artemis, sleepwort, catwort dwell, seahorn, wythe, and lilac, o'er blue star fields they reign, beer flower, gag, caron, neckweed, pine, and all like these are the gifts of autumn mists, of cloud and rain and sea. Following next, May apple, nightshade, hoodwort, few, bat's wing, gort, and ghost flower, absinthe from the midnight hour, graveyard dust and dew, winter bloom, winter cherry, vinca, deerberry, wherever these are grown, bring us gifts both dark and deep of winter, earth, and stone. Lastly comes the noble herbs, Beth and asphodel, eerie elf leaf, heath, and crown for a priest, golden pipes as well, Britannica with swallowwort, sook, and hollygold are the herbs of springtime air, of wind so ever bold. But o'er all class one doth surpass the spirit to allow, though comes at the end this worthy friend, the sacred golden bough. And here we have this wonderful illustration of the garden. The sunflower is growing. Happy little caterpillar. Beautiful sun. There were many other herbs as well, occupying other shelves and niches. Some of these were fleur-de-lis, Gilda rose, prunella, lime tree, coneflower, euphrasia, treacle, bells, tickweed, bridewort, cornicle, sunbuttons, balm, cardan, maven, boglus, cogwort, sourgrass, nymphwort, malva, henbane, nerveroot, dittany, aaronrod, gladwin, vetch, Guian silver, hedgeberry, fabaria, gift of Divid, floxwort, ruddy gem, sellage, hedge hyssop, sunpipes, trefoil, rue, turmeric, and aconite. And one of these jars? I asked, noticing another shelf further up than the others. Ah, those are special herbs indeed, Merlyn answered, walking over and blowing a cloud full of dust off the bottle tops. These are the 21 plants of Ogma. Ogma Sunface. Each one stands for a sacred rune, and each for a lesson. You, Arthur, will become more familiar with these few than with all others that you see here, for the Ogma plants have remained the cornerstone of Druid magic since the Cad goddess of ages past. Here, he straightened the glasses into rows and went slowly back to his seat. With the bottled army, Merlyn claimed the ability to alleviate most any ill, save those which were destined by the gods to be. For these permitted afflictions alone, he said, no man has the power to cure. As for myself, I was in good health, and so, more to humor the druid than out of genuine need, I asked for a brew which would ease my legs and back of the exertions of the long climb there. Merlyn quickly sought out 2 amber bottles labeled Few and Catwort, and deposited a pinchful of each into a now simmering water pot. We spent the next hour simply talking and sipping, as muscle and bone did indeed relax into a heavy contentedness. And tomorrow, Merlyn continued, tomorrow you will have occasion to view the source of these wonderful plants. In fact, it was for this reason that I brought you here. Sitting back and talking, and taking rather long puffs on his pipe, he seemed to sink into a dream. Oh, such memories, and how your father loved it here, and how much you remind me of him, he sighed. Now off to bed, and no more questions until daybreak, mind you. Try as I might to coax further comment from him, it was to no avail. This is not the first time, I thought to myself, that Merlyn has made shadows of the father I never knew. Furthermore, I was certain whether these passing comments were meant to tease me, or were simply careless tongue slips at the odd moment. Whatever the answer, I recall sleeping well that night next to Merlyn's great wooden bed, as the sound of the waterfall just outside lulled me into a deep sleep. I awoke the next morning to the strange sensation of something pacing lightly up and down my back. I jumped up just in time to see Solomon flutter off to his perch, laughing a long string of nonsense sounds. As for my teacher, he was busy tossing an assortment of herbs from his sleeves into the sparkling waterfalls just outside the cave's mouth. There was a sudden burst of sunlight through the entrance curtain, which scattered the light into a million dancing pieces of color. How did you do that? Change the colors like that? I asked, half asleep, through a yawn, and wandering over to Merlyn's side. Arthur, do you remember the small golden flowers growing at the cove of the calf bed? At the cove of calf bed? Those called pipes, he asked as I nodded. Well, each morning upon awakening, I make a small offering of this herb to the waters. In fact, for its protection during the dark hours. You might say that this is our agreement, so to speak. The colors that you saw are simply a reflection of the bond I share not only with the waters, but with all other beings here on Noise Mountain. And today, you shall make some of these acquaintances on your own. Merlyn began to assemble breakfast as I splashed back and forth through the chilling cascade of waters just outside. He had asked that I take special care to remember to wash my green robe as well, since today, he said, you have much to learn of the color green, and you must look the part. We were finishing bowls of steaming grain pottage and with molasses when the druid suddenly became very serious. Through my teachings, you have already experienced much of the other world and those who dwell there, and also how man may achieve a certain authority over them. But understand that such beings do not live upon our material plane of a bread, but occupy only their own realms. Today's task will begin your lessons in dealing with those mystical beings who dwell here among us, sharing our world and mingling their destinies with our own. But take care, for such inhabitants are not known as devas. For such inhabitants are not known as the shades of stone and sea, ours to command. No, such fellow creatures are known as devas, to use the ancient Grecian word, or as nature spirits, who accept command under no man unless their loyalties be won over by word or deed. In fact, strange as it might sound, it is actually they who hold sway over our world and doings, not taking kindly to power mad men seeking vain authority over their domains or deepest mist and dimmest twilight. But, he concluded, with a grin, this need not concern us for the day, for the lands that you are about to encounter have long held a kindly disposition towards any inhabitants of this cave. By this time, my curiosity had peaked. And what will these spirits of nature look like when we encounter one? I asked naively. At this question, Merlyn laughed long and hard, until I was eventually drawn into it with a smile myself. Until we come upon one, he repeated. You have that wrong, boy, for sure, for they are sure to come upon us, long before we are even remotely aware of their presence. But there was once a time, long ago, when the devil world was as tangible as our own, and mankind consulted and worked with it in all things. And then over time, man, in his ignorance, began to turn his back on the spirits, thinking himself clever enough to manage without their aid. When this happened, the devas retreated into shadowy seclusion amongst their hills and trees, and are now only rarely seen by those few who are willing to acknowledge their reality and purpose. Suddenly, Merlyn's face went sour, and to make matters worse, the Christians and their priests now say that the nature spirits are little more than demons in disguise. If only they would realize just how far their religion has strayed from the truths of creation, and how this world maintains her balances. And think not that the Deva kingdom is unaware of this trend in thought, Arthur. They know. Merlyn's words left me deeply affected, for it seemed that I had long known these things within myself, and needed only the druid's words to trigger them back into my memory. Were the three creatures that I saw by the road from Abergavenny of the Devil World? I asked, suddenly making this connection. They were indeed, Merlyn replied, visibly pleased at my observation. And, as I said, a true inhabitant of the Shadow Kingdom is typically invisible to our mortal eyes, and so they often clothe themselves in the myths and the thought forms which various races of mankind have created through the years. But once again, they do this only for those few whose love for the earth runs deep and whose faith runs strong. Some things, lad, must first be believed to be seen. How fortunate we are that you are considered such a one, Arthur. Now come on, let us be about our business. We left the cave, and we pushed our way through a small grove of wild apple trees, which seemed to grow from the bare rock of the mountain. Here we joined a footpath which sloped gently down toward the opposite side of the hill, soft and spongy underfoot from layers of fallen leaves. The mountain itself was stark and beautiful, with a snow-white peak far above our heads, and rich green plant life growing abundantly about its base. As we advanced further, I noted many species of animals which I had never seen before, alien as they were to the bleak terrain of Tintagel. Such creatures, in fact, often emerged within feet of where we walked, showing no fear of us whatsoever, and this too was quite foreign to me. Soon the path took an abrupt downward turn. Merlyn stopped and pointed out a lush valley area just ahead. There lies the ruins of Joyous Gard, he stated, to which we are heading for your lesson. I was led through what once was a tall gateway, but whose arched door had long since fallen back into the earth. Above the entrance, and chiseled into the stone with ornate Roman letters, were the words Joyous Gard. I suppose that the place was once a mighty place or fortress, perhaps in the days of the Romans, for thick walls still surrounded the many heaps of rubble which lay just inside the gateway. But Merlyn was not to keep me wondering long about the lore of the place, for he soon sat down upon a tumbled block of marble and gestured that I join him. Once long ago, he began, this was the home of a wise and learned prince, whose true name has been lost to time, but whom local lore has seen fit to remember as Lug Laniak. The legend tells that he came to our land from across the sea, born in the country of Gaul, which still stands among the mighty empires to the east. And being an orphan, he was taken by the hill folk before the Lady of the Lake in Avalonia, where it was decreed that he should be fostered on that holy isle, and there came into manhood. And now it was said that this boy had an uncanny way with all things green and growing from the earth, and so came to be wise in herb lores and the secrets of plants. So when at last he was full grown, Lialiok ventured forth from the Apple Isle and came to settle in this valley under the mountain. Always from the very start, he was at peace and harmony with the creatures who dwelt here, and over time, through their influence and support, transformed this very spot into a realm of great beauty and worth. In those days, it was called Joyous Jardin, which means joyful garden in the Gaelic tongue, but the Romans who followed in later years turned gardens into garrisons and profaned the name Joyous Garden into Joyful Fortress, as ridiculous a term as was ever invented. In any case, the devas and nature spirits which blessed the place so long ago, continue to inhabit Joyous Gard to this very day, and in greater abundance than anywhere else I know. And so goes the story, as it is told by the bards and the common folk, although I doubt that this location is known to anyone anymore, save those few who might stumble upon it unaware. So now that the stage has been properly set, shall we enter the ancient green from which the blessings of the gods have not yet departed? And so, from the midst of a story, we walked into a reality as beautiful as any story I had ever heard. The gateway opened into a large courtyard, sectioned off into three main areas, with a clear stream bubbling along the length of one wall. A single path meandered like a snake through the expanse, but led first to a collection of flora, alive with colors yellow and white. Merlyn assumed a teaching stance and began. In magic, there is a principle of great antiquity which reminds the twice-born that like energy attracts like energy. Simply put, this axiom points out that the forces of a similar kind tend to group together, attract, and this law is amply demonstrated in what you see here all around. For example, these plants before us belong to the elemental kingdom of air, as yellow and white have long held to be the colors of the wind. We walked across the tall patch of corn growing in the corner at a height so great that it towered over Merlyn twice his stands. See here, a plant which man has domesticated as foodstuff, he said, and which for ages has been symbolic of elemental wind. Such food as this imparts the qualities of air, enhancing youth, intellect, quickness, and judgment in those partaking. The druid then swept his hand around the other plants about us, and all these remaining herbs are of the same energy, gift-giving of the same sort. Go, Arthur, and select of the ripest two of the ripest ears from the corn patch, taking care to thank the devas in charge. Then we must be on. It did not take long to find two perfect pieces, larger by far, I thought, than three of any I had seen growing in our gardens at Tintagel. We walked on into an area where the plants seemed clothed in flame, red flowers, red leaves, scarlet fruit, and not one of the species familiar to me. I was amazed that so many plants bore such a variety of red. There was no guessing as to what element thrived there. Fire, said Merlyn. This be the area where those plants governed by flame have seen fit to thrive. Whether used as food, healing herbs, or sacred plants of power, they hold within them the gifts of heat, strength, aggression, and expansion, much as the sun does, which is itself our ultimate symbol for such energy. Merlyn bent down, and here is the plant man has chosen to grow for food, fire. He directed my attention to a low-growing patch of plants with sleek leaves and an abundance of bright red fruit hanging from stocky stems. Capsicum, he announced, which the common folk call red pepinwort, and you shall see soon enough why this is so. Again, I was instructed to gather two of the best fruits to take with us. We now approached an area of the garden which was completely different from the others I had seen. Instead of being vibrant and light and active, it was somber, dark, with rich, moist smell of decaying leaves in the air. I knew at once by this cave-like feel that we were within the plant realm of earth. The kingdom of stone, Merlyn confirmed, with the trick that he had of answering the unasked question. Here you see plants which draw their life force as much from the dragon lines deep underground as they do from water, the blood of the earth mother. Here he pointed to the stream which passed through some 50 feet ahead of us. And any of these growing things contains the secrets of old age, wisdom, death, and rebirth. Come, see here. Close along the darkest corners of the wall In and among the piles of gray and fallen stone grew mushrooms of every size, shape, and color, and in between these were legions of low-growing plants and mosses with slender shoots of deep green. These plants and fungi embody the essence of the earth element, Merlin said. Some are givers of dreams and visions, while others delight the palate in times of hunger. Look at this. Merlin took hold of a plant top and gave it a sturdy tug. Up it came, roots and all, extraordinary roots indeed, for attached to them were large, bulbous tubers about the size of a man's fist. Irish golds, the druid called them, as he handed me two of the largest ones and tucked the rest back into the ground. Selecting two of the huge white mushrooms as well, we added these to the lot and we moved on. We halted by a section of the wall where the stream bubbled happily underneath and where blue plants thrived everywhere. Water lay in shallow pools mirroring the sky amongst moss-covered stone. Everywhere you glanced was blue, and I recall thinking that this is the most beautiful section of all. We have come at last to the plants of the farthest spaced and deepest ocean, Merlin announced, which hold fast the spirit of the sea. Emotion, spiritual height, tranquility, these are the gifts. There, amid flora of every azure hue, grew vine plants which wove patterns over the ground like a thriving carpet of green. Occasionally could be seen one of their fruits protruding from underneath, and of these we chose one. These Merlin called Pimfin. With the treasure in hand, we completed the path circuit and were once again standing before the front gateway. All told, we had gathered a fine collection of foods from each of the elemental kingdoms, which we then placed in a pile under the ground upon the ground, at Merlin's instruction. In an ancient tongue that I did not understand, the druid chanted a brief prayer of thanksgiving for what we had taken, and then nodded over at me to repeat the verse. Managing the best that I could, I happened to glance up for a moment during the psalm, only to behold a strange array of spirits, as many and varied as the foods that we had just found. But when I again blinked my eyes, they were gone. We left the beautiful gardens behind and began our return to the cave, heavy laden with the spoils of our visit. We walked the entire distance in silence, not reaching our destination until nearly dark. Old Solomon seemed genuinely glad to see us, making quite a ruckus as he spied us from afar. I washed clean the vegetables in the falls, and carried them inside, where Merlin cut the lot up into pieces and placed them into a very heavy iron pot. With the addition of some herbs and a little sea salt, we kindled the night fire and hung our meal to cook, after which we walked out onto the ledge to watch the sunset. Merlin seemed to have something of importance on his mind, but acted unsure as to how to begin. The gardens at Joyous Guard, he said finally, are part of the never-ending cycle of birth and rebirth. Each year, from Beltane to Samhain, the earth renews herself from seed to harvest and back again. The great serpent spiral of nature is also reflected in the seasons as they revolve from one onto the other without end, always returning to the point from which they began. And such is the motion of the stars as they circle the earth, and the sun across the sky, and the moon from the full to the hollow. Does it not seem right, then, that man should be subject to the same law of cycles as well? A man is born, lives a life of good or evil, luxury or punishment, dies and is born anew to learn once more. After all, of what use could the few brief years of a single lifetime be to the task of perfecting the soul? Such a task needs countless lifetimes to accomplish, as anyone might reason out. And yet there are many among the Christian leaders who profess that after a handful of years and a single life, a soul is then ready for judgment unto eternal bliss or eternal damnation. Ah, how such folly can come into a civilized land uncontended, it is truly beyond me. There was a long silence, as many thoughts reeled through my head. Never before had I given much thought to the topic of death, probably because I had never encountered it in a personal way. Was Merlyn trying to say that I was really many people all in one, or had been many? It was difficult. It was a difficult idea for me to grasp at first, even though I had heard bards sing countless tales of druids, gods and heroes coming and going from one lifetime to another. One major problem was my familiarity with the Christian concept of heaven and hell, and its easy to grasp white or black simplicity. But was man not part of nature in all her grand complexity? And being so, why should he not be subject to the law of cycles as other things were? Such thoughts as these told me that there was a deep truth in Merlyn's words. I myself can surely recall more than 30 of my former lives, he continued, after a while. And before this one is ended, I shall learn about many more. Such lifetimes are always filled with mixtures of pain and pleasure, joy and tragedy, yet all contain valuable lessons I needed to learn. And so go the lives of all men, again and again, until he masters the vices of his physical world, and thereby becomes ready to move into the beyond, into the realm of the gods themselves. How great a span of time does this take? No man knows, for each soul grows, like the plants of joyous guard, at his own rate. But this much we do know, that although not always during the same life, but this much we do know, that like the plants of joyous guard, but this much we do, that which a man does in any lifetime, whether for good or ill, rebounds back upon him, although not always during the same life, but surely in another. In this way, the great wheel of life remains in balance, that which is above and that which is below, becoming equal in the end. Do therefore as much gods as your inner voice bids during your life, for no one can escape justice for their sins against self or against another. Such is the law of the Lord of Cycles. Arthur, remember this one. Remember this one thing, if nothing more. Follow your conscience, for it is the eye of God within you. Merlyn gave me a long, serious look, sensing how foreign these concepts must have seemed. How do you know? I asked. How do the Druids know that these things are so? I hoped for a simple answer. Because I remember, he stated conclusively, and so shall you, soon enough. But before I could question any further, the smell of the smell and sound of bubbling kettle inside rose us both to our feet, in agreement that past lifetimes could be better pursued on a full stomach. Dishing out the stew into wooden bowls, we ate contentedly, as only starved mystics could. After a long while, Merlyn pushed aside his plate and said, "The food we have just eaten was special in more ways than the obvious. Our simple soup provided a perfect balance of each of the 4 elemental worlds, such a balance being difficult to come by, and often sought by sorcerers prior to certain types of magical workings. Tonight, Arthur, I will have wont of your otherworld body to be in such a state of balance." As if I were able to read what the Druid's intentions were, I asked Merlyn, "How does one go about looking back into a past life? How was it that you were able to know with certainty about yours? What did you do?" My questions were met with a satisfied chuckle. "Your queries, my boy, are deserving of right, fine answer. Follow me, and I will see what can be done about them. We walked to the very back of the cave, where a large tapestry embroidered with a red dragon of Britain hung against the wall. To my surprise and delight, Merlin suddenly grasped the edge and gave it a tug, revealing a hidden passage leading back into the rock. Down into this he disappeared, calling back through the darkness for me to follow. Slowly I complied, although a growing feeling of unease tempered my pace. It was as if I had been there before. With each step, the strange familiarity grew more definite until I was able to anticipate with complete certainty what lay ahead of every bend. And then the tunnel ended, emptied into a chamber filled with rich blue light. The light, I knew, came from an immense globe, the Palatine, which hung suspended far above us. How could I possibly know this? Because somehow, through some enchantment beyond reason, we were now standing back within the giant's cave beneath Tintagel. But I was never given much time to ponder this impossibility. Merlin grasped my shoulder and led me to a corner of the chamber where a tiny stream of water trickled from the stone and collected into a smooth round basin carved out of the rock. The surface of the water shattered the blue light into 1,000 dancing specters against the wall. "This is my magic mirror," Merlin disclosed, "and within can be seen many things, both past and present. I have brought you here tonight so that you might look into it, if you so desire. But be warned. I cannot foretell the nature of the visions which may appear to you. In the end, it could well be a discouragement, but the decision rests with you." "Will you remain here with me?" I asked without thought. The druid smiled with an answer he knew would be unexpected. "I will not leave your side, my curiosity piqued." "Well, then," I said, trying to sound confident, "then I wish to look if doing so will afford me a sure glimpse at my past." Merlin stared hard and long at me, as if searching for some lost words I had left unsaid, and when at last he spoke, his voice was deep and hollow. "Stretch forth your hands over the mirror," he ordered, "but take care not to disturb the water beneath." With cautious movements I did as instructed, and there was a heavy tension in the air as the calm crystal surface of the pool was suddenly filled with ripples. Slowly I leaned over and peered down into the murky shallows. At first I only saw my reflection outlined in midnight blue against the dark stone, but this soon gave way to countless shifting patterns and forms from which I could discern nothing. But then there appeared before me images of many men, hunter, priest, builder, and warrior. On and on the vision passed, until finally the lone form of a single man remained, and this man was standing high on a hill, bathed in flickering torchlight, bearing upon his head a golden crown, fashioned into the likeness of twin serpents. To my surprise, I then saw myself standing upon the same hill next to Merlin. Without warning, the man walked stiffly toward us and removed his crown. "Receive now the symbol of hope, my son," he decreed, "and with it unite the two worlds as one, never forsaking the lineage of our forefathers." With this, the crown was placed upon my brow, and the vision faded into shadow. I was left confused and shaking in that damp place. Merlin waited a while without speaking, as if looking to see what would happen, and then finally he picked me up and carried me back into the cave. The next thing I remember, I was lying wrapped in warm blankets, listening without thought to the sound of the falling water outside. Merlin was asleep somewhere beside me, for I could hear his even breathing in the darkness. I began to wonder about the events of the day, and also those of the day to come. for I knew that my return to Tintagel was imminent the following morning. But I also knew that Merlyn promised the day would come when he would take me from the monastery for good. But how soon? My eyes flooded with tears at the thought. And what of the man I had seen in the magic mirror? What of the golden crown? As if in answer, Solomon croaked softly in his sleep, and then a sudden idea filled me with wonder. The hill, the crown, the firelight, these could only be reflections of one thing, King Uther's coronation on the night of Beltane. But we had not actually been there. We had only watched from afar atop Camelot Hill. Nor was I his son. His son? I shook my head to dislodge such an outrageous thought. And then something came dimly to mind, which the Druid had said to me upon my arrival. What was it? How your father loved it here, he had said, and how much you remind me of him. My father! I dared not think it. To stop the flow of thoughts, I pulled my blankets tightly overhead and fell at last into an uneasy sleep. So here we have the breakdown of chapter 8, talking about the 16 leashes of Dianet. The coming of the former was terrible. There was no brightness on the Tuatha De Danann that day, when they drew themselves out of the conflict. They were wounded and weary. Dianet went among them with herbs of healing. This is a Celtic Wonder Tales. In the garden, Arthur is given a thorough introduction to elemental herbalism, that is, to how plants may be seen as representatives of specific element kingdoms. The Ferrell manuscripts devotes a lengthy chapter to what it terms the 16 leeches, or more specifically, 16 healing herbs, which were the basic standards of Druidic medicine. This group is divided into 4 classes, with 4 herbs under each of the 4 elemental worlds, in addition to 1 outside in the Celtic tradition of a year and a day. In the Ferrell, the 16 plus 1 are given in their Old Saxon Middle English forms. These have been reproduced below, alongside modern European equivalents. So here for Earth, we have Few, which is also Valerian. We have Hoodwort, which is also Skullcap. We have Nerve Root, which is also Lady Slipper, and Absinthe, which is Wormwood. Those represent Earth. For Air, we have Golden Pipes, Chamomile family. Hollygold is Calendula, otherwise known as Marigold. Erie is Yarrow. Britannica is Vervain. And as I said, those represent the air. The next ones are for water. Catwort, which is also catnip or catmint. Bee flower, which is hops. I don't know why I keep having to cough. Wythe, which is black willow. Coneflower, which is Echinacea. Again, all representing water. Fire here. This is Golden Ruth, which is also Golden Seal. Amber is St. John's Wort. Sacred Bark is Buckthorn. And Quercus is White Oak. Again, representing fire. In addition, mistletoe was considered the one additional to make up the 17 total. A small amount of this sacred parasitic plant, which allegedly contained the spirit of its host, was added to all remedies and magical formula, accounting for its alternative Druidic name, Olcawood, or All Heal. The above herbs were those standards which would have been carried in small quantities by all Druid healers at large in society. They were either transported in dry powdered form, or to be steeped in hot water when needed, or they were tinctured into water alcohol-based by fermenting with grain. The latter form is more convenient for the modern druid and may be utilized as follows. Obtain 1 ounce of the dried herb, place it in a glass jar, and cover with twice its volume of a clear grain alcohol. Vodka is the standard. Leave for 2 weeks, strain through, filter, bottle in amber dropper bottles, and label. As to the dosage, the standard rule is 1 drop for every 10 pounds of body weight every 3 hours. If symptoms are severe, double quantity. The only time dosage is a critical issue is with the very young, the very old, or the gravely ill. If one wishes to follow authentic Druidic traditions, add 1 drop of mistletoe tincture per dose to any of the 16 standards, and this will act as an energy catalyst to trigger the healing power of the herb. Further, the Therild mentions that a druid's leech chest, which would have been small, about the size of a cigar box, and easily transportable, was usually made of black willow, a tree which the Celts recognized as having special mystic and curative powers. No, in fact, willow leaves are rich in salicin, which is a form of aspirin originally derived. And lastly, the 16 leeches possess the following healing property remedies for Valerian is a sedative, also for cramps, pain, and coughs. Skullcap, all nervous conditions, fevers, refrigerant. Lady slipper, nervine, indigestion, headache. Wormwood, digestion, liver, gallbladder, worms, externally for insect bites, sprains, rheumatism, and bruises. Catnip, digestion, stomachache, or cramps, calmative, excellent for children, fevers, headaches, bronchitis, and diarrhea. Hops, sleep aid, liver, digestive aid, gas, cramps, externally, antibiotic for boils, tumors, swelling, and skin inflammations, refrigerant. Black willow, pain, fevers, arthritis, kidney, bladder troubles, antiseptic, gargle, tonsillitis, and refrigerant. Echinacea, antibiotic, stimulates immune system, abscesses in teeth or body, lymph, open sores, and kidneys. Marigold, externally for sores, burns, bleeding, hemorrhoids, and wounds, in oil for earaches, vaginal infections. Yarrow, internal bleeding, ESP, lungs, gas, diarrhea, fevers, as in measles, colds, and flus, antiseptic. Vervain, colds, flu, coughs, upper respiratory, inflammations, stomatic, insomnia, pneumonia, and asthma. Golden seal, antibiotic for all internal, external health problems, eye wash, female infections, sores, skin conditions, colds, viruses, infections. St. John's wort, nerves, bedwetting, liver tonic, insomnia, decocted in olive oil for 2 weeks, tumors, all skin conditions, wounds, ulcers, burns, enlarged glands, bruises, and muscular pain. Buckthorn, constipation, laxative, digestive stimulant, gas, liver, gallbladder stones. White oak bark, internal bleeding, vaginal infections, supreme antiseptic for wounds, skin conditions, insect bites, hemorrhoids, swollen glands, tumors, poison oak, ivy, lymphatic swelling, varicose veins, mouthwash, gum problems, and strengthener. And mistletoe, vertigo, dizziness, headaches, heart problems, palpitations, high blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, nervine. Herb sources. All herbs mentioned within the garden are within the text of the 21 lessons in general, may be obtained by writing New Forest Gardens, P.O. Box 491, Westfield, New York 14787. New Forest Gardens specializes in druid specific herbs for applications as are found throughout this book. New Forest welcomes all inquirers as pertain to such green matters as well as general questions called from elsewhere in this book. New Forest Center. And that is the end of chapter 8. So we'll be looking forward to chapter 9, which is called The Challenge. Here, an illustration of the cheese ring Bodmin Moors in Cornwall. That was such a good chapter. I always love the garden. So remember, my dears, if you've missed any of the previous chapters of this magical book, please look in our playlist tab and you can find the rest of the chapters in the original playlist, The 21 Lessons of Merlyn. So, thanks again for joining us. Again, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get all of our channel notifications. Thanks again, everyone, and I will see you next time.